Welcome to the Lift Every Voice podcast, where we explore books by contemplative writers of color. I'm Christine Valters Paintner.
And I'm Claudia Love Mair. We are joined each month by the author of our book club selection. Together, we explore how increasing our diversity of perspectives on contemplative practice can enrich our experience of the Christian mystical tradition.
We encourage you to join us by reading the book, listening to the conversations, and engaging with the reflection questions on our website at abbeyofthearts.com. Welcome, everyone, to the Lift Every Voice book club. I'm joined by my ongoing conversation partner, Claudia Love, and I am delighted to introduce you to this month's guest, Dr. Kirk Byron Jones. And Kirk was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, and he holds a Doctor of Ministry degree from Emory University and a Doctor of Philosophy degree from Drew University. And he's served as pastor for over 30 years, which I think comes through very much in the book that we'll be discussing. And he presently serves as senior pastor of Zion Baptist Church in Lynn, Massachusetts, which is very close to Boston. He's also the author of many books for clergy and persons seeking spiritual growth, including books with titles like Holy Play, The Joyful Adventure of Unleashing Your Divine Purpose, and Fulfilled, and Rest in the Storm, and several others. But we're going to be discussing today this lovely book called Soul Talk, How to Have the Most Important Conversation of All. And in his mission statement, he says he believes we're all born to play and soar. So welcome, Kirk. It's wonderful to have you with us.
Christine, thank you so much. Know that the wonderfulness is shared by me for you and your writings. I've been a fan of yours for years. Thank you for writing. Thank you for writing so thoughtfully and spiritually, asking such beautiful questions, provoking spiritual growth. And thank you for inviting me to this. This is wonderful. It's you know what? I'll be completely honest. Put all the cards on the table. Friday is usually my off day. I'm out in the yard. I don't do. But when I got your invitation, I felt like the conversation would be such holy play. I did not hesitate. So I'm very, very thankful and honored to be with you today.
Lovely. Thank you. And was there anything I missed in my little bio of you that you wanted to add before we launch into the book?
Husband to Bunny for over 40 years, 41, 42 years come May. And we've got 4 grown children and 3 wonderful grandchildren that I can't wait to see in a few weeks.
That's amazing. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, do you want to kick us off, Claudia Love?
Yeah, Kirk, here at the Lift Every Voice book club, we love Howard Thurman. And we'd like for you to tell us how his words and anything else around that time inspired you to write Soul Talk.
Well, I look to my right. You can't see it, but I can. I am surrounded by my inspirations. Some of my inspirations is Ella Fitzgerald and Judith Jameson and some other folks. And to my right is Howard Thurman. And there's a marvelous picture. He was pictured on Sojourners magazine some years ago. And he's dressed casually and he's got this broad smile. It's really a laugh on his face. No, who was it? A great trumpeter used to say, Dizzy Gillespie used to say of Louis Armstrong, know him, know me. I feel that way about Howard Thurman. Know him, know me. I burned out in ministry. I'm 64 now, and I burned out in my early 30s. Reading Howard Thurman brought me back to life. You know, his autobiography, all of his books, especially The Centering Moment, called me to an inner life that I had all but ignored. I was ministering on fumes and grace, but he brought me to an inner life and continues to be a mentor. So many quotes. And here's the quote that just was catapulted me towards Soul Talk. And it's in the book. It's in the page next to the introductory page. What a quote. There's something that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It is the only true guide you will ever have. And if you cannot hear it, you will all of your life spend your days on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls. I tell you what, I read that thing over and over and over again, and it stuck with me. The sound of the genuine stuck with me. And I began to ask more questions about the sound of the genuine. What was it? How could I be more connected to it? It wasn't too long before I connected it to the soul, and statements by Jesus referring to the kingdom of God being within, or as my former professor at Drew University, Professor Ali Maria Sassi Diaz, would talk about the kingdom of God. So I began to see the connections between, and then where I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, they used to sing about something within. Something within that holdeth the rein, something within that I cannot explain. All that I know, there is something within. I wanted more of that, more awareness, more communication with, and that's what developed into my own personal soul talk, and then what I was led to share with others.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Kirk, you have this really wonderful quote on page 10. And you say that your soul is the Godmost part of you that has never known and will never know fear. Your soul is God's everlasting laughter in you, which is such a delightful image. Your soul is God's spirit, and your spirit filled to overflowing with lavish love, grace, and outrageous joy. And you talk about more than anything else, your soul wants to know how much you are madly adored by God, and the mad hope that you will live from acceptance and not for acceptance. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about those qualities of soul that you describe. How did you, get in touch with those, originally, and kind of tease that out? And what is the difference between living from and for acceptance?
Wow. I love you. I love your questions. I love your questions. You got a day? Well, let me a shout out to another source of wonderful inspiration for me that I didn't pay attention to until I left New Orleans. New Orleans is the home of jazz, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I ignored jazz until an experience that may come up later in this conversation. And so somebody like Duke Ellington had this phrase. He would end his presentations with his marvelous band orchestra that he led for over 40 years. He'd always tell the crowd, "We love you madly. We love you madly." And I thought to myself when I first read it, Duke, you stole that line, because before you said it, God embodies loving us madly. So I first and foremost see God loving us madly.
Mm-hmm.
And the spiritual journey to me is about understanding that, being made aware of it, and receiving it day in and day out, moment by moment, and giving it to others. And to me, that I don't know, I know from acceptance for acceptance is not my line, and I forget where I received it from. But to live for acceptance is to live often from scarcity,
Mm-hmm.
a sense of hesitancy, safe, people pleasing. To live, what if all the love I will ever need, all the grace I will ever need, all the affirmation I will ever need, I already have.
Mm-hmm.
What if I dare to believe that? Then I can live from that, and that means I can live from blessing. I can live from confidence. I can live from daring. I can live from not people pleasing, but my first inclination toward being with others is being fully present. being fully present. And whatever happens as a result of my being fully present to you, then let it be, and let me lean into that. So that's the difference. But I think it begins with a sense of receiving God's love, receiving God's love. Now, to do that, sometimes I've got to come into contact with my conditioning.
Yeah.
So many of us are conditioned to believe we don't deserve love from God or anyone else. We're not worthy of blessing of any sort. In this kind of world where there's atrocity on top of atrocity, and all kinds of things that break our hearts, what right have we to live blessed? Well, all the more important that we do so now, so that witness is in the world. So yeah, that's my response to your beautiful question.
Yeah, no, I love that image of witnessing, because I often use that kind of imagery as well, that, you know, it does sometimes feel overwhelming, you know, to live in this world with war and pandemic and poverty and racism. And, you know, what right do we have to say, you know, that there is this abundant love and grace in the world? And yet that's exactly what we need to embody and reflect, you know, back to others.
It's almost, Christine, it's almost insulting. It's almost, you know, how dare you? It's irresponsible. But to dig deeper and to realize that such love is not just for me, that from that comes this desire to journey on, and to journey on in community with others. And that's what we need more of. So living that way, I think, is one of the most benevolent things we could ever done. It's not selfish. It's an act of communal benevolence.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Kirk, I want to ask you about some things you wrote about between pages 11 and 13. You wrote about destructive tension, creative tension, the soul never saying anything that you truly are unable to hear, and the soul saying things you don't want to hear but need to. Could you share the differences in those concepts?
Well, I could try. I think our souls are the best of us, wanting the best for us. The best of us wanting the best for us. Those things we're not able to hear, I believe the soul waits to tell us. To tell us before we are able to hear, I think, is risking destructive tension inside of us. It's almost like, as a parent, and again, we have 4 adult children, there's some things we learn, right, as we grow as parents, things we want to say, but we know we can't because it's not the moment. And our saying it, although the intent would be helpful, but knowing the hearing could potentially be diminishing, the mature parent holds on to it. So I think the soul holds on to things that we are unable to hear. Those things that we are able to hear, but would rather not, the soul risks saying through. And when I talk about soul talk, when I talk about soul talk, I'm talking about not just this or the inner words, but the impulses of the soul, the urges of the soul, the impressions that the soul gives us. These are all a part of the soul's language. And it's a gentle and a patient language. The soul will bring these things, my experience, the soul will risk saying some things I can hear, but I may not want to hear because it can be discomforting. But the soul senses that I can hold them and go through the discomfort, and it will help me to go through the discomfort to get on the other side, which is transformation. And that's creative tension. That's necessary tension. So that's the way I would distinguish between, and the soul is artful. my experience of soul, not saying those things that I can't handle, which would cultivate a sort of destructive tension, a diminishing, it would diminish me, it would shrink me. But saying those things, inspiring those things that though causing some discomfort, will cause me to grow and mature. That's the way I experience it, Claudia Love.
Thank you.
I love that image of kind of the soul knows when to approach us and in what ways and what we can quote unquote handle. And and you talk about soul speech as distinct, non-anxious, with clarity, lighthearted, challenging, patient, divine. You have all these beautiful qualities, and I wonder if you can tell us more about this soul, like how the soul actually talks to us. How do we listen for that, and how do we help to cultivate all of those beautiful qualities in our lives in a world that's so full of the opposite of most of those things that you described?
I think it begins, well, I first want to say I've not arrived, and I'm just journeying on and experimenting. Going back to Duke Ellington for a moment, and jazz is a great spiritual teacher for me. It is said of Duke Ellington that he lived with an experimental disposition. And so I'm still living with an experimental disposition with all of this. But I realized that, okay, believing that there is a sound of the genuine.
Mm-hmm.
Start with that I believe that that exists, that I believe that there is something within. Okay, let's make the connect. And so there was in my professor of stillness, Howard Thurman, I can't believe, well, Grace, how did I do ministry for over 30 years without stillness? But I tried to do that, and now stillness is so much a part of my life. So be still, be still, be still. I'm a great fan of poetry and Mary Oliver. When you say poetry, Mary Oliver is synonymous. She's got this wonderful phrase, these hyphenated words in one of her poems where she talks about not thinking, not remembering, and not wanting. Hyphenated words, not thinking, not remembering, not wanting. And so that's when I experience stillness, that's what I want to get to, not thinking, not remembering, not wanting. And in that moment, there's a portal. I'm looking now before me, there's just, the lights that we have when we zoom now that are on us, but in the center, there's empty space, and it's like a portal. There's a portal. I think we all have this portal, and it was undeniable. I know when I'm there. And in that portal, I relax, and I talk about lavish openness and radical receptivity. I just kind of loiter and linger and lounge in that space. And sometimes I'm inclined to express feelings, honest feelings. In workshops, I say to people, when you talk about soul talk, it's not just the soul talking to you, but you talking to you, and you talking to the soul and saying some things to the soul that you may not want to say to anybody else. And your soul, I have fun when I say the soul will never tell a soul. The soul will never tell a soul. And so I begin, Christine and Claudia, I began to experience those moments, and I could not deny something was happening. I felt a new opening, a new freshness, clarity. I'd write down some sentences, I'd pose a question, inquiry, a quandary, and after a few minutes, there'd be a kind of a breakthrough thought. And these kept happening more and more. And I said, doggone it, Thurman was right. There is a sound of the genuine. And I just kept going and kept going with it. So experimentation led to trust in the process, and then a desire to want more and more. And now I don't start a day without soul talk. And the experience, I let folks know, my experience with soul talk will be different from yours, right? but I tell people the experience will be its own justification.
Mm.
If you just experience your soul, really experience your soul, you will want to more and more. And the quenching is in the thirst.
Yeah.
To stay thirsty for it, and I just can't deny. The other thing is liveliness. I feel more alive than I've ever felt in my life.
Mm.
Just a sense of, now, does that say I don't have challenges and problems? Come on. I'm not saying that. But there's a vitality that I cherish, that I believe is connected to our living from the inside out. From the
Yeah.
inside.
It
Yeah.
sounds like such a life-giving resource for you as a human being, and I imagine especially as a pastor, having to be present to so many others and their need. Yeah.
Christine and Claudia, Grace, I thank God. I've got personable parents. They're with God now. They're to my left. So I have personable parents, and I have parents who exuded perseverance. And so I've had wonderful experiences in my life. I started out as a boy preacher, and so I've had affirmation after affirmation. And that, I think, counted for, along with God's grace, being able to endure and get to the place of complete burnout with some sense of being, having a meaningful ministry. But since that burnout experience and learning more and reading more books by people like Christine Painter and poetry, I minister. I try to minister now from the overflow. It starts with personal wholeness and personal well-being, and you minister from that, and that's more fun.
Absolutely.
I minister not because I know how, but I can't help myself.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You list the 7 soul talk steps as be still, lay burdens down, listen deeply, don't run away, be honest, be gentle, and welcome new truth. This sounds very much like contemplative prayer. What are the differences between contemplative prayer and soul talk moments?
What a question. I love your questions. I love these questions. My God, my God. Initially, because I never thought about it before. Initially, I want to say that they are so much alike. That soul talk, I want to say that soul talk is a form of contemplative prayer. But then I said, but you must have a distinction. There must be a difference there. There has to be. I think if there is a difference, and this now would depend on one's definition of contemplative prayer. I would think for soul talk, let me put it this way. For soul talk, in my experience of soul talk, there's a lot of room for dissonance. There's a lot of room for, honest chaos, even just expressing whatever's there. And so that dissonance is as real and as legitimate in soul talk as the harmony and as the peace. I don't know if that's true with everyone's definition of contemplative prayer, where you're in the sounding of the words, there's a sense of harmony in contemplative prayer. Contemplative prayer, it oozes peace and harmony. And so soul talk. Soul talk crashes in to contemplative prayer and will holler and shout and scream. And so but again, someone may say, but Kirk, that's not my understanding of contemplative prayer. My understanding of contemplative prayer includes the screaming. I said, okay, so there. Yeah. But if your understanding of contemplative prayer is this kind of continual harmony, then soul talk is different.
It sounds a lot more real and human.
Yeah, yeah. But thank you for that question, and I'll keep thinking about that. Yeah.
I love that. And maybe we can talk, since you've talked a bit about, just expressing all these human emotions, you have this invitation to resisting your stillness tears. I loved that image. So what do these stillness tears have to teach us about the soul?
Oh man, wow.
Hmm.
Again, thank you for the question. My dad, the older my dad got, Frederick Jesse Jones, my mom, Ora Mae Jones, and I stand on their shoulders. The older my dad got, the easier he was to cry. And so he allowed us to see him cry. I, earlier on in my life as a child, would resist crying as a form of, just, if I would get a spanking, and we didn't get too many of them, but I'd stop, I wouldn't cry. I'm not gonna cry. Now that came back to haunt me because earlier on, it was difficult for me to cry.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing my father early, grow and welcome his tears, and then becoming a parent, and you're not a parent unless you cried. That's your life. That's your degree. You're a parent when you. So I cry now. I cry now very easily. And tears of sadness, tears of brokenness, and much of my tears is tears of joy. Tears mean for me that they flow, right? And so as long as, although and every time, I think of Ukraine, and, the tears will come. If I don't cry, I want to, just thinking about what it is to live under those conditions. But tears are, as hurtful as they are, as sad as they can be, they flow. Yeah. And as long as there's a flow, there's hope, because that flow is going somewhere. And so to me, the tears, even the ones coming from the deepest hurt, are a sign of hope. No matter how deep the hurt, I believe God's love is deeper. I remember just talking out with you, an experience I had. Something had happened, and I got to crying in my devotion. And I said, God, how in the world, if this is breaking my heart, how in the world have you been able to handle all the tears since the beginning of time? Heartbreak, I don't get this. And the image came, just an image. I have a word, not audible, but just an ocean. I have an oceans full of tears, able to contain all the hurt there ever was or will be. Oceans of tears, able to contain. So tears for me, now when I think about it, an expression of deep hurt, but also deep hope. And that helps to keep me going as a preacher. What do you say some Sundays? What do you say?
Yeah. I love that image of the ocean, because when I've gone through periods of grief, particularly when my mother died, that image in the Psalms of, God will gather all your tears in a vial. And I remember thinking, God better have an ocean for me, because a vial is not going to be enough. So
more than a vial.
Yeah, exactly. A vial sounded way too small. So,
I love it.
Yeah, but that healing grace of tears. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kirk, you wrote about an email you received from a grieving mother. I'm a grieving mother. Just observed the first anniversary of my son's death on the 17th. And you said, let me go to that part. She said that she had tried to outrun her grief with constant busyness. And yeah, that was me running until I literally broke my foot, and I cannot run anywhere right now. But what you didn't say was exactly what you told that mother.
Oh man.
So what I mean, we were talking about all that sad stuff. So what were your words to that grieving mother who could not outrun her grief?
Wow. Well, God bless you and your grief. I wish I'd retained my response. And I wish I could contact her now because I have something else to say. I have more to say than I did then. And I'll say something about that in a moment. But I think I said something, first affirming her, thank you for sharing, and my heart goes out. I'm a parent. And I can only imagine. And I know what I must have said was start with where you are. Don't deny any of it. Whatever it is, express it. And sometimes, that song, just as I am. And just keep the light on. I might have said something like, keep the light on for God. Just keep the light on. As I look at you and I see the light behind you now, Claudia, I probably said something like that. Just keep the light on. Just keep the light on. Now we just started a program here at in Lynn. It's beginning now to go national. A young person was killed in Roxbury Presbyterian Church. Reverend Liz Walker, who was one of our, she's an icon in broadcast journalism, and then turned to becoming a preacher and a pastor, was pastor of the church at the time. They started a Can We Talk program, and which was just allowing people who were traumatized by grief, including first the family of this young man, Corey Johnson was his name, to establish Can We Talk once a week. Come in and just talk. And it started building other Can We Talk programs in churches, synagogues, mosques around the country. And Zion my church just became a part of that network. So now if I had access to that dear sister, I would be able to say, you know what, there's a program called Can We Talk? And we don't try to fix anybody. We just come into a space that's non-judgmental, and we just share. There's a clinician in case some deeper help is needed. So there's clinicians. There's usually an expression of art, dance, or poetry. So it's just an hour and a half of sharing, being together, and being able to put one foot in front of the other. Corey, we had an experience. I'll say this. I'll be done. It's fresh because just this week there was a gathering in downtown Boston. The program has raised $2.5 million, $2 million to perpetuate and to generate programs around the country. The governor was there, members of the New England Patriots, our football team. It was just, it was a beautiful, beautiful moment of the community, the church community, the wider community coming together and saying, in this time of trauma, we can help each other. Corey Johnson's mother was there and was the lead speaker. And she said, I miss my son. I still miss my son. But because of Can We Talk, I'm able to keep living. That to me is priceless. Yeah.
Beautiful. Really beautiful.
Thank you.
Kirk, you talk about few different places about how our souls love slowness or love it when we linger. And then you have this lovely insight about Jesus, which I hadn't really thought about in these terms, how Jesus came back to life matters almost as much as the fact that he did. I would love you to talk a little bit more about this quality of like unhurriedness and lingering and slowness, how the soul loves that, how Jesus kind of embodied that. Yeah, what does that what does that offer to us or invite us to do?
I tell you what, it helped bring me back to life. I mean, my second book after Rest in the Storm, the first book, both books coming out of my own struggle to come out of burnout, was Addicted to Hurry, Spiritual Strategies for Slowing Down. And God does some of God's best work in the spaces and places between our plans. As I look into my life and say, well, now what happened and when it happened, most of the beautiful stuff I hadn't planned on. Thank God for goals and plans. And so to kind of slow it down, and there are more books now, more books on slowing down, rest than ever before. Yeah, be still and know that I am God. Not be overly busy, not be overly, and assertiveness and aspiration, all those things are wonderful, wonderful. But to have a base of solitude, a base of being fully present to yourself so you can be fully present to everybody, to have a sense of your own pace so that you are not outrunning your peace, to have a sense of, what your priorities are. I begin the day usually with 3 words in mind: peace, pace, and priorities. How's my peace today? How's my pace? Am I noticing? Am I savoring? And what are my priorities? What's most important today? And do I have enough margin in my day to heed the impulses and the urgings that may come at any time, so that, and everybody's got their own rhythm. You will get your own rhythm, but doggone it, I said doggone it more times with you folks than I said it. And that's usually not a part of my lexicon. I think I want to say something else. Well, I think I want to say something else, but doggone it is the best I can do. We need an alternative.
Yeah.
To hurryitis and overdosing on overcommitment.
Yeah.
We need an alternative. And the alternative sacred pace is the way I talk about, to have a sacred pace, a pace or a savoring pace, a pace with waiting in it, a pace with patience in it, a pace with lingering and loitering. Yeah. Those spaces, too much has happened in my life that's been just really wonderful. I think sometimes, especially look, if I open those blinds back there and you see some of those leaves, we'd have to stop this. We'd have to stop this conversation because we'd all be looking back at those. There's too much wonder that deserves our wandering. We're not going to see the wonder. If we're to see some of the wonder, we got to wander. And I've had too many times in my life where the wandering has yielded just the cup. David said, "My cup overflows." There's an overflow that's not connected to pushing and pulling. It's connected to loitering and lingering. I'm firmly convinced. Sometimes the highest calling of all is just to feel the breeze. To feel the breeze. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny when you say no loitering, when you say loitering, encouraging us, I think of those no loitering signs and I think, oh, be so funny in churches to have like loitering, welcome here, something like that. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Loitering is welcome. Yes.
Yep. Thank you for that.
As you were
talking, that reminded me of the quote from Alice Walker's A Color Purple,
Oh, yeah.
where she says, I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it. People think pleasing God is all God cares about, but any fool living in the world can see it always trying to please us back.
Yeah.
And I think in the rushing, you miss those kind of things. You miss
That's
the
right.
color purple.
That's right. Alice Walker's right over there, by the way.
And speaking of your books, you quoted from books about art and about dance and about jazz and about music. You quoted an obscure writing book called Poem Crazy that I have. And you are so widely read. And we had a retreat from about Saint Teresa of Avila last weekend. And she also, books were her friends and her spiritual guides. So could you tell us the place that books have held in your life and in your spiritual life?
My no books, no me. As I look around, I look around and see my books. Heaven is a bookstore. Heaven is a bookstore filled with jazz music playing in the background. That's heaven. My mom says my grandmother, who we never knew, she died before we were born. My mom's mother. Mama says that our grandmother was a reader. And so, because I came up reading, I just had to read. And Mom said that's where I got it from. So I want to say thank you to grandmama for putting that in me. And I've always been insatiably curious. And reading gives me new questions, gives me new ideas, new thoughts. Reading dialogical partners. I never met Howard Thurman in life, but I feel like I know him. I know his spirit. I taught, inspired by him. I taught a class at Andover Newton Theological School where I taught for about 30 years, or tried to, with head and heart, the life and thought of Howard Thurman. And with Howard Thurman, you bring his books, right? And you get out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Get out of the way. And so I don't know. I think life is exploration. And if speaking of books, the great actress who passed away, why can't I call her name now? African-American actress who passed away, and her name won't come to me right now, but it will before hopefully this conversation is over. And she says in her biography, when we cease to explore, that's the day we begin to wilt. The day we cease to Cicely Tyson.
I was just gonna say that.
Cicely Tyson. Thank you. The day we cease to explore is the day we begin to wilt. And now she died, I think she was in her early 90s, and died just 2 or 3 days after the book was published. She was gone. But she left us that marvelous testimony. She was still exploring. I love books because they allow me to explore and to discover. Yeah. Look, God forbid, if the house catches fire, they say, what would you bring out? I'd reach for a hand of, I'd reach for some books.
You gotta get you a Kindle. You a Kindle. Then you just have to do the whole thing with it.
Look, I got the Kindle. But I tell you what, Claudia, when the Kindle came out, I said, that's going to be a wonderful thing. And so I got the Kindle and I listened to, I read the Kindle and I listen to audiobooks. But look, there's nothing like.
Nothing like
Yeah.
it. Nothing like it. And then there are some books that just don't come on Kindle. And then there are some books that just are not the same experience on a Kindle. So I feel you.
There you go.
With you there.
Amen. Yeah. Amen.
I'm with you too. When when my husband John and I moved from Seattle to Ireland 10 years ago, we sold so much of what we owned, including most of our books. And I kept thinking, well, I could get most of them on Kindle, blah, blah, blah. Well, fast forward. And now, of course, our home is like, again, filled with,
I'm looking
so
behind
many
you.
books. Yeah, I know there's a few back there, and then there's the multiple bookcases spread out. But anyway, it's a
It's good to hear that.
beautiful addiction. Yeah, exactly. Well, we're moving towards the end of our time, but I wanted to ask you about this. You have this beautiful image of God in your book where you say God is always and forever dreaming your joy, which I just love. And you say that soul pleasure is holy. Can you tell us more about this joy that the divine, desires for us, dreams for us? How do we get out of the way to receive it? And kind of connected to that, this idea of soul, I think pleasure is something that some people are suspicious of, particularly in church contexts. So how do we welcome in that soul pleasure?
Okay, I'm glad you asked. And I'm so glad you asked. And this allows me to give evidence about God working in the spaces and places between our plans.
Mm-hmm.
A funeral at not Mount Hermon, that's my home church, Ebenezer Baptist Church, where I pastored for 7 years. South end of Boston, Massachusetts, located right next door to a school. It is midday one day, and we are beginning a funeral for a dearly departed saint and elder in the church, dressed in my holy garb, and we're about to have a homegoing service. At the moment we are going to begin the service, the recess bell rang. And the children come running out, and they're jumping, they're running, they're screaming. And I'm saying to myself in the pulpit, no, not now. This the wrong time. I say to myself, these children they're gonna ruin the funeral. Why now? And then I heard from management. And I'm not talking about the deacons or the trustees. I'm talking about inner management. Reverend, the inner voice, what do you think the deceased is doing right now in my presence? The answer, running, jumping, shouting. I never will forget the last words, so glad to be home. Running, jumping, shouting. So glad. Carry on.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
That whole experience, we went on and we did the funeral, and God bless the saint. I can't remember the saint that we celebrated. I do not remember the eulogy. What I do remember is that moment in the pulpit and those kids giving me an image that I could never forget. All of a sudden, playfulness, and that's where the book Holy Play came, and playfulness became linked to prayerfulness, and with prayerfulness and joviality, frivolity, I began to study and listen, and one understanding led to the next one, and I understood more than ever before, in a way that I hadn't understood before, with all due respect to the hurt and the harm and the danger, and God's original dream for us is joy, unspeakable joy. Children come into this world, no matter what the culture or country, all children have one thing in this world in common. They are wired to play.
Yeah.
And it's as if God places something within us that's innate, that God does not want to get adulted out of us. And so for now when I think of spirituality, I think about stillness. I think about being fully present. And I think about playfulness, lightheartedness. Frederick Buechner, one of the great writers who passed away earlier this year, I love his writing. He's one of my great inspirations to take writing seriously in a delightful sort of way. Frederick Buechner talked about in one of his books, the true sign of a saint is lightheartedness. Lightheartedness. And I believe that to be true. Again, it doesn't deny the heartache, but it suggests that heartache never, ever has the last word.
Yeah.
God will not let heartache have the last word.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, as a gospel preacher now, preaching, it's 50 years now, trying to preach. I started early. I'm making progress. Look, I preached last Sunday at Zion, and things went well. And one of my members came up to me and said, "You know what? If you keep doing what you're doing, you just might preach one Sunday." Which was his way of saying, you know, Pastor, you did a good job. But I tell you what, at my age and doing it for as long as I've tried to do it, I feel so blessed that most Sundays it is not forced.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to be doing anything else. And that this gospel that we have can stand up to anything. And we don't have to duck away from harm or hurt or pain. We can preach it through it all, no matter what. God's love is what has the last word. I believe that with all my heart. If you ever hear that Kirk Byron Jones is, you know, just quit preaching, it's because he's retired. It's not he intentionally retired. It's not because he stopped believing, because I believe in it now and understand it. I'm on the outskirts of understanding it more deeply. And it's almost like Fred Buechner said once, it's too good not to be true.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful because you embody that joyfulness, and I can imagine it's such a blessing for your parishioners, the people in your community to, just to experience that sense of like deep-hearted, soulful, willing to face the trials and the sorrow, and at the same time holding that beautiful sense of playfulness and delight. So it's a beautiful witness. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Claudia Love, did you have any other question or any other words you wanted to say before we?
I did notice that you wrote this in 2018 before the pandemic, and I wanted to ask you about soul friends, which you stated are rare. Do you think that the internet can actually give you the opportunity to have soul friends that you would not ordinarily be able to have, or could you have more because we have so much more access to people, or do you still think it's relatively rare?
It is also fitting that in this conversation of beautiful questions, we end on a beautiful question. All things are possible. So I don't want to say that soul friendships are automatically excluded when it comes to social media contact, but so many of them are surface. I want to say still rare. Giving allegiance first to all things are possible. Many of us are not living soulfully. Mm-hmm. To have a soul friend, one must in some way be committed to soulful living. Many of us are living unaware. We're sort of, Anthony DeMello is another big inspiration for me. And in one of his books, I think it's a book called Awareness, Anthony DeMello says that most of us are walking around with sleepwalking. You know, we're living lives asleep. And the only way, the pandemic took too many away, but the pandemic also helped to wake some of us up. But some of us have gone back to sleep. And Anthony DeMello, if I'm recalling that book right, says that the way to wake up is to engage the new courageously, and to be open to something new and different. That's the way we wake up. And not just to not fear the unknown, but not fear the loss of the known. Not fear the loss of the known. So we're walking around asleep, and that means many of us are fearful. We're walking around, we're running around, hurried. Soul friendship, my experience of soul friendship, and I have 3 persons I consider soul friends. I didn't have any soul friends prior to understanding that I didn't need to overdose on overcommitment. I didn't have time for friendship.
Mhm.
Part of my malady and a part of my burnout was I didn't have a life that allowed for friendships. There's a new chapter in Rest in the Storm that was written, that we did a couple of years ago, with a new chapter, 2 new chapters, one on creativity and one on soul friendship. That's how much I value soul friendship now. Soul friendship requires awareness. It requires courage. And when I say courage, I mean openness, honesty, vulnerability. And it requires patience, you know? So to the extent that we have those commodities, we can have soul friendship. To the extent that we're deficient in those areas, we can't. So I still want to say, Claudia, that it's kind of rare to have a soul friend. Kind of rare, yeah. Doesn't have to be, but I think it's still rare.
Thank
Mm.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kirk. I've so enjoyed this conversation and your just very generous-hearted presence. I just want to remind everyone that we're talking about soul talk, how to have the most important conversation of all. And this has been Dr. Reverend Kirk Byron Jones. And I encourage you to check out his book. He's got multiple books, and to check out his website too, because he's got some resources there as well. So thank you so much, Kirk. I'm just delighted that you said yes to this invitation.
You are most welcome. It's been a joy, Claudia, Christine. Now I can say I met Christine Painter, and I met Claudia. Hey, and Claudia, you got a lot to live up to. Anybody with the last name Love?
No, that's part of my first name. It's actually Claudia Love.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Claudia Love?
I gave myself that name so that I would embody love, so that I would have a constant reminder of being loved.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you both. This has been a joy. This has been Holy Play.